If you're into your golf equipment, you may well have noticed that TaylorMade have just launched two new drivers. Gone are the M5 and the M6, and in their place are the SIM and the SIM Max. The question is, are they better? Let's go and find out. Hello everyone, Neil Tappin here from Golf Monthly, and welcome to this video in which we are going to be reviewing the two new SIM drivers from TaylorMade, and we're going to put them up against last year's M drivers. We're going to split the verdict up into 5 different categories: looks, feel, distance, accuracy, and we're going to provide an overall verdict as well, so make sure you watch to the end to find out what we thought of the two new drivers. Now, before we get into the first of those categories, just a quick word on what SIM actually stands for. It means shape in motion, and the whole idea here is about aerodynamics. Usually when the manufacturers measure aerodynamics, they're measuring how the club head moves through impact, but actually the club head is only at that angle for a very short part of the swing. If you think about where the club is halfway through the downswing, it's at a very different angle. They wanted to make sure that they weren't creating any drag in that part of the swing that was actually going to ultimately cost speed. So they've redesigned the sole of the golf club a bit. They've moved what they call their inertia generator. It's now an asymmetric design on the sole, and that means that it should move a little bit faster through that downswing phase of the swing to help you create more speed and ultimately more distance. So that's what SIM stands for, but how does it perform? Let's go and find out. So I'm going to start by talking about the sole view of these new drivers, because I think that's where you're going to notice the biggest difference in terms of the looks. Now, if I put the SIM, which replaces the M5, up against the M5, you will immediately notice that TaylorMade have done away with this central weight track here. Ultimately, what their engineers were discovering was that even with their tour players, their fastest swingers, most of the time, players were putting this central weight all the way back in the head to maximise for the forgiveness. So that central weight track was becoming slightly redundant. So TaylorMade have removed it in order to use that extra weight elsewhere in the driver. So what you have with the new SIM is this look here, which is you have this inertia generator coming out the sort of back of the head, a bit like you had in last year's M6, and you have this weight track here that allows you to set the driver up to hit a fade or a draw. Now, the M6 versus the SIM Max, you'll notice they are fairly similar in terms of how they look on the shelf. The key difference being that with this, again, this inertia generator, it's asymmetric, it sits slightly more towards the toe. And then when you put the driver down behind the ball, you'll notice a slightly different aesthetic there as well. Gone is that sort of more matte, that duller carbon composite crown that you saw in the M drivers. In its place, the crown of the driver has just been brightened up. So the carbon composite is a little bit brighter, and this strip here is also a little brighter as well. I think TaylorMade call it their chalk white finish. So it's grey, but it's definitely brighter than in the previous generation. It's not massively different, I'll be honest, from what we saw last year, but for me, it's been modernised slightly. And the only other thing I'll say in terms of the look is that both the SIM and the SIM Max are slightly bigger to look down on than their previous generation, so the M5 and the M6. They look slightly bigger down behind the ball, and certainly if you're tempted to go for the SIM Max driver, that I'd say is considerably bigger and more generous looking down behind the ball than last year's M6. So if you are a slightly higher handicapper that wants that extra confidence inspiring look, I think the SIM Max will offer that. So there you have it. In terms of the look, I'll be honest, there's not a massive amount of difference between M and SIM. The look has been tweaked slightly, it's been modernised, and for my eye, it looks slightly better than it did last year. Okay, so when we talk about feel, what we're really speaking about here is the sound of the golf club. And I used the TaylorMade M6 last year, and one of the reasons I loved it so much was that for me it was the best feeling driver on the market. The sound was quite powerful, it was quite dull without being too dull, feeling like you had to swing the club hard to get the ball up and away. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to hit a couple of shots. I'm going to hit a shot with each driver, and I'm going to see if you can see what the differences are in terms of the sound, because ultimately that will be the key. Starting with I'm going to start with the M6. It's that really sort of quite dull but still very, very powerful impact sound that I really liked about the M6. And I'll be honest, I really do hope that TaylorMade haven't changed that too much with the new SIM drivers. So I'm going to start with the SIM Max to see if there's any difference there. Let me know if you think you can detect anything. It's pretty much the same, I'd say. Possibly this is a touch louder than last year's M6, but not a lot in it. So I'm going to hit the M5 now. For me, that's really the benchmark for what a great driver should sound like. I really do love the sound of the two M drivers. Let's see if they've changed the new SIM. Well, for me, it's really quite hard to detect any major differences there, and that's a good thing. It's a good thing because TaylorMade drivers, for me, stood out last year because they sounded fantastic. They felt absolutely brilliant. And I don't think that's going to be any different with the two new SIM drivers for 2020. Now, before I show you the distance numbers, just a quick word on the specs of each of the drivers. I had them all set to 9 degrees, and I used the same Diamana 60 gram X Flex shaft, which comes as one of the stock options in this year's SIM drivers. Now, I started off by hitting the previous generation M6, and I was creating club head speed of 113.3. That was delivering me ball speed of 159.2 because the club head efficiency, so this measures the quality of the strike, was measured at 1.41, which is pretty good. Now, when you put all of those into the launch monitor, it created an average spin of 2041, peak height of 36 yards, and a total carry distance with last year's M6 of 278. And that's really strong performance for me. As I say, this was a driver I used last year. That's the sort of performance I would have expected from the M6. But how did the SIM Max stack up? Well, the club head speed took an immediate jump up. So the club head speed went to 114.7. That gave me a ball speed of 163.2, so 4 miles an hour more ball speed. The club efficiency was slightly better as well at 1.42. So with the SIM Max, I was creating a little bit more spin, about 200 RPMs more spin, which was creating a little bit more ball flight at 43 yards. But look at the jump in terms of the total carry distance. Now, I need to add obviously a little bit of a word of warning here. I'm not a pro, I'm just an amateur golfer, but the specs were the same, and you can see there has been a jump in terms of the distance performance. So let's take a look at the M5. Well, with the M5, I was creating a club head speed of 115.6 miles an hour. That was delivering me a ball speed of 161.6 because I had a pretty good club head efficiency of 1.40. The spin was, again, very good for me at 2087, peak height of 39, really solid performance, delivering a total carry distance with last year's M5 of 282 yards. So that leaves me finally with the SIM driver. Could the SIM driver beat the M5? Well, if we start with the club data, so club head speed was 115.8, so a tiny fraction up with club head speed, but not much. Ball speed of 164, that's up. But that's mostly up, I'd say, because the quality of the strike was slightly better at 1.42. In terms of the spin, it was spinning a fraction more at 2178, peak height of 37, so really strong ball flight for me, and a total carry distance of 287. So a little bit longer with the SIM than I was with the M5, and a little bit longer with the SIM Max than I was with the M6. Now, you can make of that data what you will. I know there'll be people out there that will feel as if perhaps I was hitting the new product slightly harder than I was with the old product. I can honestly say that isn't the case. I'm trying to hit the ball in exactly the same way with both drivers, and they were set up, all four of them, in exactly the same way. It does seem as if the work that TaylorMade have done to the aerodynamics has delivered that little bit more club head speed, albeit not a huge amount, a little bit more ball speed, and therefore an overall more distance. And I think that if you do go for a fitting with the new SIM drivers, it's probably something you're going to notice, especially if you are currently using something that's not from 2019. If you're using something that's from a little bit further ago than then, I think you're going to notice a jump in terms of the distance with the two new SIM drivers. Okay, so the next category is accuracy, and as I mentioned before, last year I used the M6 driver, and the reason that I loved the M6 so much was that I felt like I was able to control it. You know, out on the golf course, hitting the ball fairly hard, I felt like I never really was losing too many shots too far right or too far left while I was out on the golf course. That's why I really loved the M6. And to be honest with you, that's probably why I'd be quite reticent to move into either of the new SIM drivers. Now, I have had the chance to test out their accuracy, but only indoors on the launch monitor. I haven't had enough chance yet to put all four drivers through their paces on the golf course to be able to compare them. What I would say is that the driver that I felt most comfortable with in terms of hitting shot after shot after shot and keeping it on the golf course was the SIM. This was the one that I just seemed to click with me immediately, and I was able to hit a succession of really good shots with it and feel like I was in complete control of it. But of course, I would want to do a little bit more testing. Now, the one thing, a bit of advice I would offer if you are tempted by either the SIM or the SIM Max driver is I'd think a little bit about your own game. If you're somebody that has a consistent miss, let's say you tend to miss right quite often, then having the ability in the SIM to move this weight and put it into a draw bias will help you hit more fairways for sure. Alternatively, if your strike pattern is out of the heel and out of the toe, then that extra forgiveness, that higher MOI than you get from the SIM Max might well be the way to go. In terms of accuracy, so therefore, I can't really offer too much of a verdict, but what I would say is that I don't think TaylorMade have changed the drivers from M into SIM for me to worry too much that either of the drivers was going to offer a lack of accuracy over what you would have had last year. So before I get onto the overall verdict, just a quick word on the prices that you can expect to pay. So with the SIM driver, this comes in with a recommended retail price of £479, and the SIM Max is a little bit cheaper at £449. Now there is also a D version of this, a draw bias version of the SIM Max driver to help those players that tend to lose shots out to the right a little bit. And obviously, without a shadow of a doubt, that is a premium price point, and for that premium price point you do get a premium performance. The drivers look great, they feel great, and they will offer really good distance and forgiveness, exactly what you would expect them to do. Are they massively different? Is it a huge leap forward over what we had last year in the two M drivers? I'll be honest, not for me, not in terms of the testing that I did. However, I did see improvements in ball speed, I did see improvements in the overall distance. And when you factor that in with the fact that they still look great and they feel great, I think that TaylorMade have got two really strong performing drivers on the market for 2020, and especially for anyone out there who hasn't maybe upgraded their driver for a few years, I think you are going to notice much more significant gains than I was able to find by testing them up against last year's previous M5 and M6 drivers. So there you have it, that's the two new SIM drivers for 2020, the SIM and the SIM Max. Guys, what do you think? Please do leave comments below. We'd be really interested to hear your thoughts about the way that TaylorMade have changed things up for 2020. Leave some comments below, and if you've liked the video, please do hit the like button as well. But that's it, that's all for now from West Hill. Thanks for watching, we'll see you next time.